Ethan Ward had everything a man could dream of: wealth, fame, and beauty that seemed sculpted by the gods. At only 28, he was one of the youngest tech millionaires in New York. His company, Ward Tech Industries, was a global empire that had revolutionized artificial intelligence. The media adored him, women desired him, and men envied him. To the world, Ethan was untouchable, a golden boy with an empire built from brilliance and ambition. But behind the glittering facade of success, Ethan's life was cold and empty. His penthouse was filled with art, luxury cars, and people who smiled only when his money was involved. His relationships were shallow, built on attraction to his status rather than his soul. He believed love was a myth, a fairy tale invented for people too weak to face loneliness. That belief began to crumble on a stormy evening in November. Ethan had been feeling weak for months: dizzy spells, sharp pain in his chest, strange tremors in his hands. But he ignored them, blaming stress. He had no time for weakness, until that night when he collapsed in his office, surrounded by holographic screens, flashing lines of code that blurred before his eyes. When he woke in the hospital, everything changed. The doctor's face was serious, his tone careful. Ethan had a rare degenerative disease, something so uncommon that few had even heard of it. The prognosis was grim. There was no known cure, only treatments that could delay the inevitable. The words hit him harder than any business failure ever could. For the first time, Ethan felt powerless. News of his illness spread like wildfire. Investors pulled back, friends vanished, and the glamorous women who once fought for his attention disappeared overnight. Even his most trusted employees began to distance themselves, whispering behind closed doors about the fall of the genius. Ethan withdrew into his mansion on the outskirts of the city, a massive modern fortress of glass and steel that now felt like a prison. His days were filled with silence, interrupted only by the faint beeping of machines that monitored his condition. His only company was the team of servants who still worked there, though most avoided him out of fear or pity, and that was when she entered his life. Her name was Isabella Ruiz, a quiet, beautiful young woman with long dark hair and skin kissed by the sun. She had recently been hired as a cleaner through an agency, a job she desperately needed to support her little brother and sick mother. She wasn't used to luxury. She came from the outskirts of the city, where people worked hard and dreamed small. To Ethan, she was invisible at first, just another employee who moved silently through the hallways, cleaning what no one used anymore. He barely noticed her presence, but Isabella noticed him. She saw a man drowning in silence, trapped behind glass walls. While others looked at him with fear or disgust, she saw the pain in his eyes, the loneliness, hidden behind the arrogance of a once powerful man. Every morning, as she dusted the grand piano or watered the orchids in the sunroom, she would glance toward the room where Ethan spent his time, seated near the window, staring at the grey sky. Something about him stirred her heart. Not pity, but compassion, and an inexplicable pull she couldn't explain. One day, when she was cleaning his study, Ethan entered unexpectedly. Their eyes met, his cold and distant, hers soft and sincere. For a moment, time stood still. "Don't bother," he said sharply. "That room doesn't need cleaning anymore. Nothing here does." His tone was bitter, but Isabella didn't move. She looked at him and for the first time spoke softly. "Maybe it's not the room that needs cleaning, sir. Maybe it's the air around it." Ethan froze. No one had dared speak to him like that in months. He didn't know how to respond. Part of him was annoyed, but another part, the part that still longed to be human, felt something shift. He turned away without replying, but as she left the room, he caught himself watching her. The grace in her movements, the quiet strength in her eyes. That night, as rain tapped softly against the glass walls of his mansion, Ethan lay awake for the first time thinking, not about money, not about his company, not about death, but about her. And without realizing it, The man who had everything but love had just met the one person who would teach him the meaning of life itself. Days turned into weeks, and the once vibrant mansion had become a silent monument to Ethan Ward's isolation. The marble floors gleamed, the chandeliers sparkled, but the air was heavy with despair. Ethan's world had shrunk to a few cold rooms, his office, his bedroom, and the balcony where he sometimes sat to watch the rain. He had pushed away everyone, doctors, assistants, even old friends who tried to reach out. And yet, despite his efforts to remain alone, there was one person who refused to disappear into the shadows. Isabella Ruiz. She was unlike anyone Ethan had ever known. She didn't walk with the stiffness of someone afraid of making mistakes in front of a rich man. She moved quietly, gracefully, but with a kind of inner strength that caught his attention. She never tried to impress him. She never asked for favors, never flattered him. She simply did her job with humility and quiet dignity. One morning, Ethan overheard two of his staff whispering near the kitchen. "She shouldn't talk to him so much," one of them said. "He doesn't like people around." "Maybe, but at least she's not afraid of him," the other replied. "You can tell she cares." Ethan didn't admit it aloud, but those words struck something inside him. She cares. It had been so long since he'd heard those words directed toward him. The next day, he found her in the library, dusting the tall shelves that reached the ceiling. Her hair was tied back, and sunlight from the large windows made her skin glow like bronze. She hummed softly, a song he didn't recognize. It was peaceful, and for the first time in months, Ethan didn't feel the urge to fill the silence. "You don't have to clean that room," he said suddenly. She turned, startled but not frightened. "I know," she replied with a small smile, "but I like this room. It feels alive." Ethan frowned. "Alive? These books haven't been opened in years." "Maybe that's why it's sad," Isabella said simply, her voice soft but firm. "Things die when we stop caring for them." Her words hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't just about the books. She was talking about him. He wanted to argue, but something in her gaze silenced him. From that day, Ethan began to notice her more. The way she greeted everyone with kindness, even those who ignored her. The way she lingered by the window to admire the sunrise before starting her work. There was a quiet beauty about her that had nothing to do with appearance. It was in her spirit. As his illness progressed, Ethan's physical strength began to fade. Some days he couldn't even stand without trembling. One morning, while trying to pour himself a glass of water, his hand shook so badly that the glass fell and shattered on the floor. The sound echoed through the house like a cry. Isabella rushed into the room. "Mr. Ward, are you all right?" "Leave me alone," he snapped, humiliated. "I don't need help." But she ignored his anger. Kneeling, she carefully picked up the pieces, her fingers trembling slightly. "You could hurt yourself," she said softly. "I'm already hurt," he muttered bitterly, turning away. She paused, then said something he would never forget. "Then let someone help you heal." There was no pity in her tone, only compassion. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat, but he didn't respond. Still, that moment marked the beginning of something he didn't understand yet. Something that would slowly melt the ice around his heart. Over time, Isabella became more than just a housekeeper. She began preparing his meals personally, staying late to make sure he took his medication, and even reading to him from the books in the dusty library. She read with emotion, her voice soft and musical, and sometimes Ethan would close his eyes just to listen. He began asking about her life. At first, she hesitated, but soon she opened up. She told him about her childhood in a small neighborhood filled with noise and laughter, where money was scarce, but love was abundant. She spoke of her mother, who worked tirelessly despite her illness, and her younger brother Matteo, who dreamed of becoming a musician. Ethan listened silently, surprised by how much her stories affected him. They were simple, but full of meaning. Everything his own life had lacked. One night, during a heavy storm, the mansion lost power. The halls were dark, lit only by candles. Ethan was weak and couldn't sleep, so Isabella brought him tea and sat by the fireplace to keep him company. "You're not afraid of the dark?" he asked, watching her calm expression. She smiled. "Darkness only scares those who have never learned to look for the light." He looked at her for a long time, his chest tightening with something unfamiliar. Not pain, but warmth. They sat in silence for hours, the firelight flickering across their faces. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel like a dying man. He felt human again. As weeks passed, his condition seemed to stabilize. The doctors couldn't explain it, but Ethan knew why. It wasn't the medicine, it was her presence. Isabella's kindness was healing him in ways science couldn't measure. But there was one thing he didn't realize. He was falling in love with her, deeply, irrevocably. Yet he was terrified. How could a man like him, who had once treated people like servants, fall for a woman who cleaned his floors? How could he confess feelings he barely understood himself? So he said nothing. He hid his emotions behind polite words and guarded looks. But every time she smiled, something inside him broke a little more. And Isabella, she felt it too. She saw the way he looked at her now, not as a maid, but as a woman. Still, she kept her distance, knowing their worlds were so different. But fate has a way of ignoring the walls people build, and soon an unexpected event would test their connection, something that would bring them closer than ever, or tear them apart forever. Part 3. The secret between them. The days grew colder as winter crept across New York. The trees around Ethan's mansion stood bare, their skeletal branches scratching against the windows like whispers from another world. Inside, the once lifeless halls had begun to breathe again, softly, quietly, almost shyly, because of her. Isabella. Ethan's days now revolved around the moment she appeared. Her footsteps in the corridor, the scent of lavender from her cleaning supplies, her laughter when she spoke on the phone with her brother. Those small details had become the rhythm of his existence. He was no longer the man who barked orders and built empires. He was learning to listen, to notice, to feel. But love, especially the kind born from suffering, never grows without resistance. Ethan's illness, though seemingly stable, had not disappeared. The doctors warned that his sudden improvement might only be temporary. There were nights when he woke up gasping, his heart hammering violently, his vision blurring. But he said nothing to Isabella. He didn't want her to worry or worse, to pity him. And Isabella, she carried a secret of her own. Every day after leaving the mansion, she took 2 long bus rides to the small apartment she shared with her family. Her mother's condition had worsened. Medical bills were piling up, and her brother Matteo had stopped going to school to work part-time at a grocery store. Isabella worked extra shifts, sometimes cleaning offices late into the night, hiding her exhaustion behind her warm smile every morning. But she never told Ethan. She didn't want his sympathy. She didn't want to blur the fragile boundary between their worlds. One evening, as snow began to fall for the first time that season, Isabella entered Ethan's study to bring him dinner. He was sitting by the fireplace, a book open in his hands, though his eyes were far away. "You didn't eat lunch," she said gently. He looked up, startled from his thoughts. "Wasn't hungry." "You have to eat, Mr. Ward. You're getting weaker again." Ethan gave a faint smirk. "You're starting to sound like my doctor." "Maybe because I care more than your doctor," she said softly, before realizing what she had just admitted. Her cheeks flushed. "I mean—" But he interrupted her. "You care?" His tone was quiet, uncertain. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, of course I do. Anyone would." "Not anyone," he said, his eyes fixed on hers. "Everyone left when I got sick, even people I thought loved me." Isabella's heart tightened. Then they never really did. For a long moment they said nothing. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence with warmth. Ethan closed his book and leaned back. "Tell me something," he said finally. "Why do you stay? You could find an easier job, better pay, fewer problems." She looked down at her hands. "Because sometimes people need someone to stay, even if it's hard." That night, after she left his room, Ethan couldn't sleep. Her words echoed in his mind. Someone to stay. He realized how long it had been since anyone had chosen to stay in his life without wanting something in return. And as the snow fell outside, covering the world in silence, Ethan made a promise to himself. He would find a way to thank her, truly thank her. The next morning, Isabella arrived later than usual. Her eyes were tired, her movements slower. Ethan noticed immediately. "Are you all right?" he asked. She forced a smile. "Just didn't sleep much. That's all." But later that day, as she was cleaning the main hall, she fainted. Ethan heard the sound of something falling and rushed out of his room. Seeing her lying on the floor, pale and trembling, his heart clenched in fear. "Isabella!" he cried, kneeling beside her. "Hey, open your eyes!" Her eyelids fluttered. "I'm fine, just dizzy." "You're not fine," he said, his voice trembling. "You need a doctor." "No!" she gasped, grabbing his wrist weakly. "Please, I just need rest. Don't call anyone." Ethan stared at her, confused and frustrated. Why was she hiding something? He helped her to the couch, his own hands shaking from weakness. "You've been working too much, haven't you?" She looked away. "I need the money. My mother, she's sick." The truth spilled out before she could stop it. For a moment, the proud woman who never asked for help seemed fragile, human, and heartbreakingly real. Ethan sat in silence, absorbing every word. When she finished, he said softly, "You should have told me. I didn't want you to think I was using you," she whispered. "You've been through enough. Using me," he repeated bitterly. "Isabella, you're the only person in this house who treats me like I'm still alive." Their eyes met, his full of gratitude and sorrow, hers full of pain and confusion. That night, Ethan made another decision. The next morning, while Isabella was still resting, he called his lawyer and arranged for her mother's medical expenses to be covered anonymously. He told himself it wasn't charity, it was justice. It was the least he could do for the woman who had given him back his will to live. Days passed, and Isabella slowly recovered. She never discovered that Ethan was behind the hospital payments. She only noticed he seemed happier, lighter somehow. One evening after dinner, she found him sitting on the balcony, watching the sunset. The sky was painted in gold and crimson. "It's beautiful," she said, standing beside him. He nodded. "You know, I used to think beauty was something you could buy, cars, art, houses, but now I realize beauty only exists when you have someone to share it with." Isabella smiled sadly. "That's a rare thing to say for someone like you." He turned to her, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm not someone like me anymore." There was a long silence, the kind that says everything words cannot. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a confession without sound. The days had grown shorter, and the chill of early winter wrapped the mansion in a somber stillness. Outside, frost touched the trees like silver lace, and inside, Ethan Ward sat near the grand window, watching his breath fog against the glass. Once he had commanded empires, moving people, money, and machines with a single word. Now, even standing too quickly made the world spin around him. But lately, he noticed something miraculous. The pain that had once dominated his body was softer, quieter, almost distant, and he knew why. Her, Isabella Ruiz, had become the light in every corner of his darkened life. She no longer came and went like a shadow among servants. Now she moved freely through the mansion, with a presence that warmed every room she entered. It wasn't her beauty that captivated him, though it was undeniable. It was the quiet fire inside her, the strength in her gentleness, the grace in her silence. Each morning began with her voice, a simple, "Good morning, Mr. Ward," but spoken with such sincerity that it touched a place in him long buried. He had once dismissed kindness as weakness. Now it was his only reason to wake up. But love, Ethan soon learned, isn't born only in peace. It grows most fiercely in suffering. One afternoon, while walking through the garden with her help, he stumbled and nearly fell. Isabella caught him, her arms instinctively wrapping around his waist. For a moment, time stopped. Their faces were inches apart, his breath shallow, her eyes wide with worry. "I told you to slow down," she whispered. He smiled faintly. his voice trembling. "If I slow down, I'll never move again." Her hand lingered on his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath the thin fabric of his sweater. For a second, she wanted to pull away, but she couldn't. The man before her was no longer the cold, arrogant millionaire who had once ignored her. He was human, fragile, and alive. From that day, something unspoken bloomed between them, a connection neither dared to name. Their conversations became deeper. They laughed, they argued, they sat in silence that no longer felt awkward but comforting. Ethan began to write again, keeping a small leather notebook filled with thoughts about life, death, and love. Words inspired entirely by her. Sometimes Isabella would find him gazing at her, and she'd blush, pretending not to notice, but she knew, she could feel it. He was falling for her, and against all reason, against all fear, she was falling too. Still, she kept her distance, not because she didn't want him, but because she was afraid. She was just a housekeeper, a poor girl with calloused hands and old shoes. He was Ethan Ward, a man the world had once worshipped. What future could they possibly have? But love doesn't ask for permission. One night, after she had finished cleaning the kitchen, she passed by the library and saw the door slightly open. Inside, Ethan sat by the fire, the soft glow lighting his face. His hands trembled as he tried to hold a pen. "Can't sleep?" she asked, stepping in. He looked up and smiled weakly. "Can't write either. My hands don't listen to me anymore." Without thinking, she walked over and took the pen from his fingers. "Then let me help you," she said. She sat beside him and began to write as he dictated. His voice was low, steady, and filled with feeling. "When the world forgets your name, when the light you built begins to fade, there is always one heart, untouched by fame or fear, that still remembers who you are." When she finished writing, there were tears in her eyes. "That's beautiful," she whispered. "It's about you," he said simply. The words hung in the air like music. Isabella froze, unsure what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with such honesty, such tenderness. She felt her heart racing, and when she looked at him again, his expression was not one of pity or gratitude. It was love, pure, unguarded love. He reached out, his trembling hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You saved me," he said softly. "When everyone left, you stayed. You made me believe again." "Ethan," she whispered, unable to speak, the words forming in her throat. But before she could say anything more, he leaned forward, and for a moment their lips met in a kiss that felt like sunlight breaking through endless storm clouds. It wasn't passionate or desperate, it was gentle, fragile, like something sacred. When they finally parted, she looked down, trembling. "You shouldn't," she murmured. "People will talk." "Let them," he replied, his eyes glistening. "For the first time, I don't care what people think." From that night their love grew quietly, hidden from the world. Isabella continued her work, and Ethan continued his slow recovery. But every stolen glance, every touch, every whispered word became a promise, and then something extraordinary began to happen. Ethan's health improved, not just emotionally, but physically. The doctors were baffled. The disease that had been consuming him was suddenly losing ground. His strength was returning, his tremors fading. They couldn't explain it, but Ethan didn't need science to tell him what he already knew. Love had healed him. One afternoon, while walking through the gardens together, Ethan stopped suddenly and took her hands in his. "Isabella," he said, his voice trembling not with weakness but emotion. "You were the one miracle I never expected. You didn't just heal my body, you healed my soul." Tears streamed down her face. "You don't need to thank me," she said, softly. "I didn't do anything." He shook his head. "You did everything." He pulled her close, and they stood beneath the pale winter sun, wrapped in the warmth of something far stronger than wealth or fame. Love born not from perfection, but from brokenness. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Ward wasn't afraid of the future. But just when it seemed the darkness had finally lifted, fate would reveal one more secret, something Isabella had been hiding from him all along, something that could either destroy the life they had built or prove that their love was stronger than destiny itself. Winter had fully arrived, and the mansion was cloaked in silence beneath a thin layer of snow. The once empty corridors now carried the faint echo of laughter, Ethan's laughter, something no one had heard in nearly a year. For the first time since his diagnosis, life had returned to that cold house. Isabella's presence had transformed it into something almost sacred. She no longer came to work as a simple employee. She came as the heart of that home, as the quiet reason Ethan smiled when he woke up, the warmth that replaced the sterile chill of his existence. They had built a fragile, beautiful world together, one made of small things. Shared meals, long talks by the fire, walks in the garden, the soft brushing of hands that spoke more than words ever could. Ethan's health continued to improve beyond all expectation. The doctors were astonished. They said it was a miracle, a spontaneous remission. Ethan knew better. It wasn't chance, it was love. But even miracles have shadows, and Isabella carried one inside her heart, a truth so heavy that it haunted her every night. She had known from the very beginning that this moment would come, the moment when love would demand honesty, when silence would no longer be kindness, but betrayal. But every time she tried to tell him, her courage faltered. How could she destroy his happiness with the truth? How could she risk losing the man who had given her life new meaning? It began one morning when she didn't show up for breakfast. Ethan waited, a little impatiently, thinking she might be late. An hour passed. 2. Concern gnawed at him. Finally, he went searching for her. He found her in the garden shed, sitting on a wooden stool, her face pale as snow. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to hold a cup of tea. When she saw him, she forced a smile. "I didn't want you to worry," she said softly. "I just needed some air." He crouched in front of her, frowning. "You look exhausted. Are you feeling sick?" For a moment her eyes flickered with fear, and then she shook her head quickly. "No, I'm fine. Just a little dizzy, that's all." But Ethan wasn't convinced. He reached for her hand. It felt cold. "You've been working too hard. You need to rest." "I'll be all right," she said with a fragile smile. "Please don't worry." But he did worry. And that night, while she slept in the small guest room at the far end of the house, Ethan stood at her door, listening to her quiet breathing, praying she would be all right. He didn't know why, but something inside him whispered that her silence wasn't just exhaustion. It was fear. Over the next few days, her strength seemed to fade. She tried to hide it, smiling, working, laughing softly when he teased her. But Ethan could see the shadows beneath her eyes. When he confronted her, she always changed the subject. Then one evening, everything unraveled. They had been sitting by the fire, reading together, when she suddenly dropped the book. Her body went rigid, and she gasped softly before collapsing. "Isabella!" Ethan caught her before she hit the floor. Panic filled his chest. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. He carried her to the sofa, shouting for help. The house staff came running, and moments later the doctor who had been monitoring Ethan's condition rushed in. But this time, the examination wasn't for Ethan. It was for her. When the doctor finished, his face was grave. "Mr. Ward," he said quietly, "she needs to go to the hospital. Immediately." Ethan's heart pounded. "What's wrong with her?" The doctor hesitated, then looked at Isabella, who turned her face away, tears spilling down her cheeks. "She didn't tell you?" "Tell me what?" Ethan demanded. The doctor sighed. "She's sick, very sick." The words hit Ethan like thunder. He turned to her, his voice trembling. "Isabella, what is he talking about?" She looked at him, her eyes full of pain. "I was diagnosed months ago," she whispered, "before I came here." He froze. "What do you mean? Diagnosed with what?" She swallowed hard. "It's a rare form of anemia. It affects the bone marrow. The doctors said there's treatment, but it's expensive. I couldn't afford it, so I kept working. I didn't want you to know. You had enough pain of your own." Ethan felt his world tilt. The woman who had saved him, who had given him life, had been dying quietly beside him all along. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice broke. "Because," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, "you were finally getting better. I couldn't take that hope away from you. I wanted you to live again, even if I couldn't." He grabbed her hands, his heart aching. "Don't you ever say that again. You will live. I won't lose you." But her strength was fading fast. The doctors admitted her to the hospital that night. Ethan refused to leave her side. He sat by her bed, holding her hand as machines beeped softly around them. Every memory they'd shared, every smile, every word, flashed before his eyes like a film he couldn't pause. Days passed. Her condition worsened. Ethan offered money, influence, anything to save her. He called specialists, arranged treatments, bought the best care in the country. But Isabella only smiled weakly. "You can't buy time, Ethan," she whispered. "You taught me that." He shook his head fiercely. "Then I'll find another way." And he did. He sold one of his companies, poured every dollar he had into her treatment. The same disease that had once threatened his life now mirrored itself in hers, and he refused to let fate win twice. As weeks went by, Isabella began to respond to the new treatment. Her strength slowly returned, though her body remained fragile. Ethan never left her side. He read to her, made her laugh, brought her flowers from the garden they once walked together. One night, as the snow fell silently outside the hospital window, she reached for his hand. "You shouldn't have done all this for me," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "You did it for me first." "But I was just your housekeeper," she whispered. He shook his head. "You were never just anything. You were the reason I'm still alive." Tears welled in her eyes. "And you were my miracle." Ethan leaned closer, his forehead touching hers. "Then maybe," he said quietly, "we were sent to heal each other." From that moment, their love became unbreakable, a bond forged in pain, tested by fate, but purified by truth. Ethan no longer saw her as someone to protect. He saw her as his equal, his strength. Months passed, and Isabella's health improved steadily. The doctors called it a miracle recovery, but Ethan knew miracles had nothing to do with luck. They were born from love that refuses to surrender. When spring came, they left the hospital hand in hand. The mansion was no longer a place of sorrow, but a home, warm, alive, and full of hope. Still, one last chapter awaited them. Ethan had made a promise to himself. He would spend the rest of his life proving that love, real love, could conquer even the darkest destiny. And soon he would show her that promise in a way she would never forget. It started quietly. Every morning, while Isabella worked in the garden, Ethan met with architects, decorators, and musicians. He had no interest in grand luxury anymore. What he wanted was meaning. He asked them to help him build something beautiful, not for the world to see, but for her. In the farthest corner of his vast estate stood a neglected glasshouse, a place once filled with exotic plants, now overtaken by dust and vines. It was there that Ethan decided to create his surprise. Day by day, he oversaw the transformation. He replaced broken glass panels, brought in hundreds of candles, filled the air with jasmine and lilac, and restored the fountain at its center. When the work was finally done, the glasshouse no longer looked like part of the old mansion. It looked like a sanctuary, a place where love itself could breathe. And in the middle of that sanctuary stood a small table for two, surrounded by flowers, lights, and soft music. He called it the Garden of Promises. The night of the revelation. The evening was perfect. The sky painted in shades of rose and gold, the wind soft and sweet. Isabella was in the kitchen preparing tea when Ethan appeared at the doorway, wearing a dark suit that made his eyes gleam in the fading light. "You look different," she said, with a soft laugh. "What are you up to?" He smiled mysteriously. "Come with me." She frowned, a little confused, but followed him through the long corridors and out into the garden path. The air was cool, the scent of flowers heavy and intoxicating. As they walked, she noticed the flicker of candlelight glowing from the glass house in the distance. "What is this?" she whispered. "You'll see," Ethan said, taking her hand. When they reached the door, he paused, looking into her eyes. "Before we go in," he said softly, "I want you to know something. Every step you've walked beside me, every word you've spoken, it saved my life. I want this night to be my way of saying thank you, and something more." He opened the door, and Isabella gasped. Inside, hundreds of candles burned softly, their reflections shimmering against the glass walls. The scent of jasmine filled the air. The table in the center was covered in white linen, set with crystal, glasses and golden cutlery. Soft music played, a piano melody that seemed to float through the air like a dream. Her eyes filled with tears. "Ethan, what is all this?" He led her to the table and smiled. Dinner, but also a promise. They sat together, their hands brushing occasionally, their eyes meeting in the candlelight. For a long time they spoke little. The silence between them was enough. After dinner, Ethan stood and walked toward the fountain at the center of the room. He turned to her, his expression tender, his voice trembling slightly. "I used to believe I had everything," he began. "Money, power, fame, things that the world told me were worth living for. But the truth is, I had nothing, not until you walked into my life." He took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "You showed me what it means to care, to love, to live not for myself, but for something greater. You gave me strength when I was broken, light when I was lost. And because of you, I believe in miracles again." Tears glistened on Isabella's cheeks. She rose slowly, her heart pounding. "Ethan," but he held up his hand gently, reaching into his pocket. When he dropped to one knee, Isabella covered her mouth with both hands, trembling. "Isabella Ruiz," he said softly, "I don't have kingdoms to offer or the strength I once had. But what I do have is a heart that belongs to you completely. You turn my pain into peace, my loneliness into love. And if you let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you. Will you marry me?" For a moment the world stood still. Isabella's tears fell freely now. She shook her head, not in refusal but disbelief. "You can't mean that," she whispered. "I'm just a girl who used to clean your floors." He smiled, his voice breaking with emotion. "No, you're the woman who cleaned my soul." At those words she dropped to her knees in front of him and threw her arms around him. "Yes," she cried softly. "Yes, Ethan. 1,000 times yes." He held her tightly, and for a moment it was as if time itself bowed before their love. The candles flickered, the fountain sang softly, and the stars above seemed to shine just for them. The days that followed. Their wedding was small, held in the garden where they had first truly seen each other. Only a few close friends and the household staff attended. Isabella wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, and Ethan wore no tie, insisting that formality had already ruined enough of his life. When the vows were spoken, there wasn't a single dry eye among those watching. "I found you when the world had forgotten me," Ethan said, "and because of you, I'll never forget what it means to love." "And I found you when I had nothing," Isabella replied, her voice trembling. "But in you, I found everything that matters." As they kissed, the wind stirred gently, and the roses around them seemed to bloom brighter, as if heaven itself had blessed their union. Months turned into years. Ethan sold his remaining companies, donating much of his fortune to medical research for the very disease that had once nearly claimed his life. He and Isabella traveled to small towns, helping those in need, building clinics, schools and shelters. They no longer lived as billionaire and maid. They lived as two souls who had chosen love over pride, humility over power, and faith over fear. Ethan would often wake before dawn, watching Isabella sleep beside him, her hand resting lightly over his, a heart, and every morning he whispered the same words into the quiet light of day, "You were my miracle," and she, half asleep, would smile and whisper back, "You were my reason." Epilogue. Years later, when people spoke of Ethan Ward, they no longer mentioned his wealth or inventions. They spoke of the man who built a hospital for love, the one who said that the greatest cure in the world was kindness. And in the garden behind that hospital, beneath a small cherry tree, stood a plaque that read, "This garden is dedicated to the woman who taught me that love is the greatest miracle of all, to Isabella, my forever light." And on quiet spring mornings, when the wind passed through the blossoms, it almost sounded like her laughter, soft, eternal, and full of life. Because love, true love, never dies. It only changes form and continues to bloom forever.